Okay, here we are. We are live, Victoria. I am very happy, glad. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy and glad to welcome Victoria Noorthoorn, a brilliant art historian and a curator I admire and I have been following her work through the years. And Victoria is, for those who don't know her, the current director of the Modern Art Museum in Buenos Aires. But she has done wonders in her life as a curator. She has curated three biennials, three very important biennials: Pontevedra in 2013, León in 2011, and Mercosur in 2009, if I am not wrong. She was the first curator at the very early years at the MAMBA Museum in Buenos Aires. She worked at the Museum of Modern Art at the International Program. She has really accomplished an incredible career as a curator. But the reason I wanted to have this conversation with Victoria is because 2020, as we all know, marks the centennial of our dear, admired Léon Ferrari. And I know Victoria was very close to Léon, and before we start this conversation, and I just would love to hear Victoria about Léon and how does she think about the work today. But I'll like to acknowledge that my link to Léon I owe to Victoria, partly, but more than partly, because when I began working at the Museum of Modern Art in 2003, she made me aware that the chief curator of drawings at the time, Gary Garrels, had visited Léon and had put on reserve some drawings. And then, as often at MoMA, the thing stayed there in a limbo, nothing happened. And so I made the effort to go back to that and to reactivate that process, and it ended up with a beautiful acquisition, the first acquisition of works by Léon at MoMA, and ultimately to several projects that I was involved with Léon, among them an exhibition that I organized at MoMA. But it was through Victoria, and I always had Victoria present when thinking on Léon, and when working. And I know that also Victoria was close to Léon, very close, during a moment of international consecration in 2007 when he won the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale. And then, most recently, as director of the Museum of Modern Art in Buenos Aires, she organized an incredible exhibition with works Léon, which accompanied an important donation, an important gift of works to the museum. So we'll show some pictures of that exhibition, and I'll be curious to listen to Victoria about Léon. So thank you for accepting this invitation. I know you are super busy. I can't imagine what is to be the director of a museum in these very critical days. And I'm very, very, very grateful. I'm very happy to have you here, Victoria. Welcome.
Thank you, Luis. For me, it is the best possible program I can have at this time. This is a gift from God.
Yeah.
And I have to say that it's as if I've been invited by three friends, by Luis, to whom I really cherish, and I also take very deeply in my heart, and I admire him enormously. I wouldn't have enough words to tell you how much I admire everything you do, everything. From your poetry to your personality, to your knowledge, to your curatorial work. It's incredible. So I'm very honored. And also, I think I've been a little bit invited by Léon, wherever he is.
Yes.
And also, I have to say that I take the Galeria Nara Roesler in my heart. Nara was the first person who, once I came back to live to Buenos Aires in 2002, was the first person who opened an international door for me. And I consider her a bit like a godmother in the world or something of the like. So, yeah. And I cherish her and her family. So I'm I feel at home, and I'm very grateful for this.
That's great. She's our godmother. She rescued me from my wilderness after MAMBA. So here we are. Victoria, well, Léon Ferrari, a major figure in the art of the Western Hemisphere during the second half of the 20th century. But tell us, why don't we begin by just chatting about how did you tell us your personal history with Léon's work and with Léon, and how this has been taking form then curatorially and as director of the Museum of Modern Art in Buenos Aires. But tell us that history, that narrative of you and Léon.
Well, it's a bit overwhelming to try to simplify. It was a very beautiful and how would you say? I wouldn't say intense, but a very fruitful, very beautiful friendship that we built. And perhaps to start talking about his work, well, I will tell you a few anecdotes as we go along, but we used to discuss in his studio, no? One of the polemics that we liked to discuss was whether his early abstract drawings of the 60s were political or not. And yeah. I would tell Léon that they were totally political. And yeah. Léon would some days would say, no, they are not political. You know, this was what I wanted to do, and I did this. And for instance, these were very early drawings, 1962, 1961. He had also started to do his wire sculptures in 1961. And then another day, and if you could leave that one, Rafa, that would be great. It's called A Man from 1962, that sculpture.
The sculpture.
And one day I'm with him, and he's always saying that the drawings were abstract and were not political, and then one day we are looking at a similar drawing to this sculpture, and he would say, suddenly he laughs alone. I say, like, what are you laughing about, Léon? He says, oh, imagine what a joy it will be to see the generals inside this cage. The military. And so I was like, you see that. Yeah. So I think that is it's one of those very beautiful moments, I think, in Latin American art where what in another culture, let's say, I don't know, the North American, European axis, you would almost without doubt approach from a formal level in relation to minimalism or to other traditions or ways of making poetry, let's say, or artistic or poetics. Here, there's no way out to the political aspect of a lot of abstract art in Latin American art, no? And this is.
I agree with you. I think that just to comment on what you said, which I think is very important, is that to trap the work within this dialectic between, you know, what is political, what is supposedly not political because abstract, and what is political because the literal content or the literal political content, it's a little bit of a trap. And I think, you know, particularly with Léon, I think that what really happens since the beginning of those drawings in the early 1960s, it's that he's working with this different opposition or different dialectics, which is not abstract and figurative. It is textual and figural, and that dismantles the opposition between abstraction and figuration. He's focusing on the opacity of language, and the ultimate goal of that is to dismantle critically the power of language. I mean, you can only face power. I mean, the only way to produce a critique of power, a truly deconstructive critique of power, as Léon did, must begin by dismantling the language of power. Therefore, language. And I remember that beautiful abstract drawing that MoMA acquired is one of my favorite ones in the early ones, among the early ones, which is the Sermon of the Blood, based on a poem by Rafael Alberti. And all these journals entries, Leon making several drawings. He knows he's dealing with language, even if you don't see language. And he's dealing with the opacity of language. And only through I think, a productive face-to-face with the opacity of language, you are able to then deconstruct power. And I think I agree with you. Not only because then in a process of transfiguration, those cages became different kind of cages in Sao Paulo in the 1980s, and those drawings also transformed themselves. And not only because he might have literally included political content, but they were political at the root. I agree with you.
Yes, I agree. And also there is another aspect of language, if we may call it a language, which I believe enters very early in his work, also in the even I think there is a drawing of 1960, which is music, no? And the rhythms of music, and there are some works that you don't know if he's referring to music or to writing, but definitely there is this how do you say, consciousness of expression, let's say.
Absolutely.
No? And it's a very, very, very interesting moment of Leon's work. And perhaps we can go to some of the drawings of the I think you have a 1976 drawing, which is very beautiful. And I think in this drawing you can see this for me is a very clear political statement, no, where you can see Leon angry, no, you can actually see that anger, that frustration. This is the year where the military dictatorship, this is like the height of the military dictatorship in Argentina, and he exiles to Sao Paulo. But in this drawing, you see the anger, you see the frustration, but you also see, and this comes from the 60s, of course, and Luis, perhaps you want to talk about cuadro escrito in relation to this, but he's been working with calligraphy for 12 years when this drawing is created. And in these drawings and in previous drawings, in the 1976 drawing, I'm still in the 1976 one, in the 1976 drawing, you can see that expression of that is nonsensical in what do you call it, in normal terms. I don't know how to say it in English.
I love that you say nonsensical. You know, I was the other day reading for other reasons something that said, a true creation is always scandalous. I mean, produces scandal because it makes meaning stumble. So the nonsense, it really makes meaning stumble. And these drawings, I am very happy that you are referring to them, Victoria, because I've been always fond of them. Because this is, as you say, this year of tragedy, not only collective tragedy for Argentina, for Leon, but also personal tragedy. Is a year he loses his son. His son is murdered in Buenos Aires, and I see them as on a figurative level, no, really almost iconographical level. Is the beginning of a repertoire on hell, on then there is hell as word, and then there is a letter to the Pope, and there is all these references. But what you said is I think much more significant at that iconographical level. It is this rage, this angerness, this anger, this pain that is absolutely visible through a gestural repertoire that is not figurative, and it is so clear in the sense it works. And I've always thought that Leon, you can think of Leon in terms of a kind of a chiasma, is a gesture of language, and the language of gesture, and how to transform language into a gesture, which obviously is a social and a political gesture, and how to look at the inner gestural materiality of language. But you know, now you are saying, talking about this drawing, Victoria. One day, talking with Louis-Philippe Noé about León, you told me this. This is something I wanted to ask you about, because now that we're is that, you know, we have all this work from the 60s, which is both, you know, figural and political at the same time. I prefer to forget about this ridiculous distinction between abstraction and figuration, which is meaningless.
Of course.
But that first part of the work is sarcastic, is ironical, is deconstructive in a very sarcastic way. But then 76 brings a gravitas, and that is Noé who told me that. 76, from 76 onward, he continues to be working on you know, levels of irony and sarcasm, but there is a gravitas, there is a tragic gravitas that is informed into the work. And I think this is the beginning of that moment.
Yes, you know that what you tell me refers to a series that I don't know if I have seen an image here. It's a series called Errors from 1991, which is the year that eventually, I think now we will go back to the 60s, but I'm skipping a little bit. But when in 1991, León comes back to live to Argentina, returns to Argentina, and he creates this series called Errors. And basically what it is, I think everybody who's listening can imagine it, and then one day they can look at the website in the gallery. But basically it's like this. I want to draw it in the screen here. It's like, it's a little wave that he does with his pencil, and another one here, like another one, very, very, and they're very small, and one next to the other, and like as if they were many, many lines, but intertwined, and they cross each other as they go. And basically it's nothing. It's just one line and another that is sort of crossing out, and another that is crossing out, and the whole paper or surface, according to which material he used. So basically, and those which, you know, a US art historian, if the first day he or she would see it, would think, oh, it's a minimal work, no?
Yeah.
But no, and I was talking to one of Leon's granddaughters one day about this work, and I was saying, oh, it's so strange, this work is so silent at this time. I don't understand why it is so silent at this time. And she said something that stayed with me. And she said, you know, Victoria, this is the year when León comes back to Buenos Aires, and that he actually realizes physically that his son is not there anymore. No? Wow. And this is one of the only times that we see like an overwhelming sadness in his work. Wow. This very silent series, and this like very monotonous gesture, no? That so I think it's a work that is always charged, no? It's never, there's nothing that is superficial, there's nothing that is eccentric or that is decorative for this. There's nothing that is accessory. Everything is essential in his work, which is something that I'm always very struck, because he's always done, he's such a prolific artist who has done such an incredible amount of works. And in every work you see that investment, no? Course, yes. Of conviction, his enormous conviction. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about that. Or if you want, we can go, in order to be more organized, we can go back to language, to cuadro escrito, if you would like to.
We can go to the very famous cuadro escrito that belongs to the MAMBA collection, I think, or Constantini collection. Maybe Rafa can put that image exactly there, which is you know, I don't stop thinking of this work. And I myself think that there is, same here, there is a pendant, a diptychal work vis-a-vis this one, which is the one that was able to acquire for MoMA, which is the following one. In this, and I will explain why I think of that. I think of that as a unintentional diptych. Is that in this drawing, León, with this masterful use of the calligraphic gesture, produces a text where he describes the painting he would have done if God, and that's critically important, is that probably among the words, the most clear words in the text is the word God and the word mod. And you know, for whoever has a slight idea of Christian theology, the juxtaposition of the word God and the word mod is a condensation of Genesis, of the creation of the world, of the creation of means we are made of mud, but actually in this case we are mud. I mean, and I think mud in all the possible levels and unfolding possibilities of meanings, it's important to look at León. But then, so what, you know, fascinates me, because I've been also interested in the anti-theological dimension of Léon Ferrari's work, is the fact that he produces this drawing, which actually is a description of a painting he cannot do because God didn't put his attention on him. God was, you know, flirting with Alafia and touching Alafia, which is a whole deconstruction of the theological image of God through a text that actually describes a painting. And I know that people have produced an interpretation of the work as a conceptual work, because in the sense there is a relationship between some conceptual works that actually describe the world rather than produce the image of what they describe, or rather than produce objects into the world they describe through language. But I think this is much more complex than that. It's much more complex because it has an erotic level, it has a theological level, it has a figural level, and there is this mass of language that you are almost incapable of reading, that faces you as pure opacity. However, there are these hints of transparency within the it's such a. And the other drawing, maybe Rafa can put the other drawing there, which is a drawing that has this one. It's similar to the cuadro escrito, but in this case, and it's more political, in this case, even being theological, because he says, I would love to make a sculpture, a statue. He says, statue. If I would be able to make a statue, I would do this statue of Lyndon B. Johnson as an apocalyptical angel or demon, and then describe the apocalyptical scene going on at the moment in the Vietnam War. So in this case, God is there, deconstructed through the figure of the evil that is President Johnson, and so totally in the midst of the political realm of the time, of the Civilización Cristiana, the very famous work with the Christ on the bombardier. But just to end with my obsessive thinking about these two drawings, you know, I very much think, Victoria, that there is a possibility of reading that very beautiful concept token by Avi Barbour, the Nachleben, which is the resurgence. Suddenly in modernity, and particularly in Latin American modernity, you see the resurgence of antiquity through antithetical forms. And what we have here, in a way, that's all a personal interpretation, is on one hand is Philostratus, and Philostratus is the author in the 3rd century after Christ of a very famous book called The Icons, which are description of paintings linguistic description of paintings that never existed. And in a way, the idea of a sophistic image, an image that only exists through language, it's called ekphrasis, that is the beginning of that tradition. And I think León re-embodies totally, obviously adding his own personal contribution, his own personal view, political view in the quadro escrito, and then the equivalent to Philostratos in terms of sculpture is Callistrato. So we have the two ancient figures here resurfacing into drawings that are both anti-theological and both political in a sense.
Total. And there is another element that I dare add to your list of in your complexity, which is humor, no?
Humor, totally. Totally.
And you are right. I think when you were referring to the fact that the early drawings in the 60s or the works they have a sarcasm, no? They have this. You see León enjoying what he's doing and laughing out loud and not having any problems with his criticism of the world and the organization of the world and the organization of politics, and I think of that very important tradition of critical humor in the history of art, no?
Yes, definitely.
So
I mean, one of the things that admires me the most is the way the work, he kind of, creates a repertoire, a figural repertoire at one moment, and then he goes back to that repertoire at several moments in his life, adding levels and kind of adding a new kind of information, and the whole thing is a fascinating process of transfiguration, beginning from repertoires that were set at a moment and then revisited by him at several times during his life. But definitely this breaking point that is in the 1970s, the exile in Sao Paulo, the loss of Ariel, and the tragedy, and then the addition of gravitas to that repertoire of humor and irony, but then gravitas and the whole, in 91, he told me, and everybody knows this, he started reading the Bible, I mean, systematically, and he started reimagining all this reading of the Bible through collages and all this humongous, monumental deconstruction of Judeo-Christian imagination, embedding it into the tragedies of history, embedding it into the opacity of bodies, and that's fascinating. It's really, I truly think that León reinvented collage in the 90s. And if one day a big survey of collage in the 20th century is done, this must be a critical moment, a critical chapter in that history.
Yeah. And it's also another enormously prolific. I'm having an echo. I don't know why, but there I go. That's it. Here.
Yeah. It's fine. Sound, yeah. So, Victoria, tell us about, you were very close. You are very close to Rob Storr, who was the curator of the Venice Biennale in 2007. I had a suspicion that you were very instrumental in the fact that Rob included León, but he was an admirer, but you were very close to that process. You were there. And that was such an important moment for León, because it implied an absolute international consecration at that moment when he won the youngest of all artists, who at the time was 80-something, and he won the Golden Lion. No? Tell us about that.
Well, I have a nice anecdote to share with you. First, it's important to say that Rob unilaterally, alone in New York, he invited León. Like, this is clear cut. I had nothing to do with that process, nor any influence. But one day, Rob calls me and says, "You know, I invited Leon, but I don't get an answer. I don't get an answer." And I was like, "Oh my God!" So I call Leon. I say, like, "What is happening? You know, like, you know, you've been invited to the Venice Biennale. You need to reply. You know." And he says, "Hi, Victoria. Do you think I need to work with someone coming from the country of imperialism and this and that?" And I was like, "Oh my God, like what to say? Like what?" Okay, so I hear this, and then Rob calls me. He says, like, "How was the conversation?" I was like, "So it's not very good," I said. So he says, like, "What do you think? Do you think you can have a positive answer by next week?" He asked me. And I said, "No, I won't be able. I need 6 months." I said. and Rob, I couldn't believe it. Rob said, okay, let's do it. I trust you. I give you 6 months." Okay.
Wow.
So I go. I knew Leon had his super retrospective at the Pinacoteca in Sao Paulo, and he was totally obsessed with his show, and he couldn't think about anything else. So I thought, you know, we have to leave him do his show, and let's see afterwards. Well, Leon opens his show at the Pinacoteca, and just by chance, this was really, Leon didn't believe in God. I believe a little bit. So I thought, like, okay, this is someone in the extraplanetary world that is organizing things here. And I cross paths. Can you believe this is a big city? I'm walking in the street somewhere very different from where I live, and who comes in the same street with his baston, with his
cane,
stick? Leon. I was like, "Leon, tell me, how was the show, how was the opening in Sao Paulo? It was fantastic. This, that, no sé qué." And he says, "Oh, Victoria, we need to talk about Venice, don't we?" And I said, "Oh yes, no, but Leon, don't worry. I told the curator that you would not participate. You know that you're not interested in working from, you know, the country of imperialism." And he opens the eyes like this. No, he opens like, "No, you didn't say that." "Yes, I told him there's no chance. There's no chance that you're going to work with him." And he says, like, "No." I said, like, "Well, if you want, perhaps we can, you know, I can try to convince him back again to see if the invitation can still stand. Do you want me to give it a try?" "Yes, please give it a try." And then I thought, "So when can you come to the studio? Can you come tomorrow?" He says. I said, no, I'm very busy." I said, I can go in 2 weeks. So we waited 2 weeks. And I told Rob, "I think in 2 weeks I'm going to have a good answer." And I arrived to the studio at 10 a.m. in the morning, and he was there waiting with a cigar, no? Sitting in his armchair. He had a, how do you call it? Un atril. I don't know how you call it in English. One of those things where you put the paintings on, no? Bueno, he was like with his cigar. It's like, "Leon, what are you doing? You know, smoking a cigar at 10 a.m. And he says, "I'm starting to celebrate my participation in the Venice Biennale." Anyway, so that was it. So it was a very beautiful process, and I basically acted as a link between Leon and Rob. Rob wanted historical works. Leon only wanted to do new work, which is typical, you know, in terms of artists. And so I convinced them both that we needed to do a combination.
Yeah.
So you had L'Osservatorio Romano on that long wall. There was a series of collage, which is in the same line of rereading of the Bible, which you were mentioning. And there is of course, the Western and Christian civilization, which is the plane that Leon did as a criticism to the Vietnam War, very famous work. and then there were the apocalyptic clouds, atomic kind of clouds that Leon did, which for him represented, the deformation of the world and let's say a polluted, deformed, post-apocalyptic existence. And so he was not very far away in his predictions.
No,
and
no. He was acutely aware of the world he lived in, and it's really, when we see the work in its entirety, it's really impressive. It's really impressive the way he was. It's kind of.
And you mentioned today, when we were talking just briefly before this live conversation, you made a very important question, which is what is the relevance of Leon's work today, in light of what is happening all over the world, and of course in the United States and in Brazil and in so many places. And I was thinking, he treated so many themes so critically, but perhaps the ones that came first to my mind were the Brailles that he did in 1997, which he directly criticizes discrimination, both anti-Semitism and all discrimination towards different genders, towards different religions, towards different nationalities. So he had this enormous una bandera, how do you say, this flag for equity, justice, social igualdad social. I don't know how you say it in English. Equality. So he really voiced out in very clear and provocative ways. I can say in a terrain or an art world that at the time there was not so much criticism, at least in Argentina at the time. The voices were sometimes very timid. No, of course there are artists that have been very, very adamantly and politically voicing out, but Leon, he would be never timid. No, he was always criticizing in a very, very clear and adamant way everything that was against his convictions. No.
Yeah, it was totally consistent and all the time. And he never. My point is, I think he never sacrificed the complexity of the complexity of the work. I mean, even when he was the most apparently superficial, sarcastic of artists, the el tetero con la declaración with the human rights declaration inside, these kind of jokes, dash,
yes.
not that joke.
There was something that I think is very critical, is with the fact that he was so prolific, because for every series he went on and on and on and on and on. So you wouldn't have one collage of the Never Again series that were illustrating the reports of torture in the dictatorship in Argentina. There were 97 or 78 covers and collage. For every theme, he would be producing thousands or hundreds of objects, as you say, the bottles with all the different animals creating this statement, and in that amount,
they were shitting on the saints, no?
Exactly, and he would. Of these works, there are hundreds of these works in which Leon uses religious icons that he puts in very complicated situations, and this was part of course, of his criticism towards Christianity and the conception of sin, no, which for him was unforgivable. Was why did Christianity create the conception that there exists a sin that needs to be punished, and that conception of punishment for Leon was the root of violence in the world or in humanity. and he systematically would questioning that those structures of good and evil and punishment, and well, here is the final judgment, which he had different birds doing their necessities.
That series of works, because he made numerous of those. I mean, it was a performance, if I understand well. The process is that he put that cage with birds, with real birds, and at the bottom of the cage, a reproduction of the final judgment, either by Michelangelo or the Sixtine Chapel or the Giotto, whatever. And then obviously the birds were sitting on that image. And the result is this. I mean, again, this is, I see it as an implicit manifesto of that issue I was trying to refer before. Yeah. Is how.
But there was also, and here in this work, there is also the implicit criticism to the role of the Catholic Church during the dictatorship in Argentina in alliance to the military. No,
absolutely. It's you know, it's a Prometheus endeavor to be consistently, as an individual alone, dismantling this humongous theoretical fiction that buttresses Judeo-Christian imagination. And we have to measure that. I mean, we have to really take into account of what does that mean to spend the whole life of an individual alone, dismantle that monumental and very often awful theoretical fiction, that imaginary. But the final judgment is, to me, a work that functions in so many levels, because then you have this emblematic figurative work that, thanks to the excrement of the birds, regresses towards its figural materiality, where the figures are now erased, and we cannot say it's not beautiful. It's such a beautiful thing. I mean, the deconstruction, the destruction of this sublime image into this reparographic opacity of excrements that brings it as pure figural, senseless materiality, and in that sense is very much a very complex work, and it is ironical. And when you see these birds in the cage, there is humor. This is the acidity.
Yeah. Well, I see this work and I hear Leon's laughter,
Of course. But then I think he was so brilliant in the sense that, because you might find other examples of individuals who have enragedly fought against Judeo-Christian imagination, but often you find in them resentment and violence, and they tend to be always in a major tonality, like apotheosic tonality. Leon was brilliant in avoiding the apotheosic tonality and in deconstructing and turning things around through humor, through sarcasm, through this kind of the nudity of images too, these kind of almost canvases of images.
He was never, in Spanish you say panfletario, no? He was not,
never.
There was never one line, no? So if he would create an enormous criticism, but the poetics of the work, the formal aspects of the work were enriching the message all the time. And for instance, what you were speaking about the juicio final, the final judgment, I was remembering a series of collages that we showed at the Museum of Modern Art here in Buenos Aires in late 2018, in a context of an exhibition to reopen the museum, which was called A Tale of Two Worlds. And there we made a small gallery, which you had to have you needed to know that you were entering into a place with delicate content, let's say, and the series of collage in that gallery were dedicated to his criticism of the Nazi regime and the concentration camps in Germany. And the images, I mean, it was hard for one as a curator to see those collages, like they were hurting your eyes, your soul, your conception of humanity. And he had this courage, to actually put those images out there, to show them. And the family, I am totally in admiration for the family always, that they continue with that attitude of, okay, Victoria, let's try. We need these drawings to go to a German collection, to a German museum. These drawings need to be in Germany. And I go like, this is incredible. They're always...
Well, you brought them to Frankfurt, because the Tale of Two Worlds is that incredible exhibition that you organized with MMK Frankfurt, which is a review. I say that for those who don't know, a review of late modern Latin American art in dialogue from 1940 to 1980s, no? And León was included. So
there was a little room in Frankfurt, very hidden. We didn't show too many because it was very difficult. But I want to bring to the fore that courage, that he didn't have limits in order to manifest his convictions, to express his convictions.
No, I think something that struck is the way, because through that line that, as you see, obsesses me, which is how he really established he set the deconstruction of power through the deconstruction of language, which I think is the only way to do a fruitful deconstruction of power. But then that brought him to the opacity of language, to the absolute opacity of language, the gesture of language, or the language of gestures, and the opacity of calligraphy, and the opacity of the body, the bodily condition of images. And so this presence, this acceptance of the body of the work, which I think goes through the entire production of León, it cannot overcome the fact that images are mute, that they don't talk. And you were referring to the Braille. So you have these images that are mute, and suddenly they talk through the tactile presence of that language. So how language became a gesture, and how language was able to touch the world, to touch reality, and to touch the most painful moments of the world and reality in an absolutely fruitful way, as you are describing for those collages on the Holocaust, and all these collages on the Christian imagination, and that he.
And there were also, it's interesting what you are saying in regards to language, but there is also another line that goes through the entire work of León, not entire, but through a lot of his work, is the sensual aspect of his work and the erotics of his work, and he is thinking about those things. You can see it, you can listening to it. The Brailles are a direct appeal to touch when he does these drawings and calligraphies and Brailles over, for example, nudes by Egon Schiele, and he wants you to touch, the female nude. And it's so, it's playful. He is also a child. In many of the works, you can see him enjoying creation as a child would. I remember, in early 2000s, going to his studio, and I couldn't believe. I said, like, León, what are you working on? He had this glitter, this glue with glitter that the girls, 8 years old girls use. Well, there was drawings with glitter, and I was like, León, what are you doing? I'm enjoying myself.
that very late work is such. I think it's it still needs a fresh curatorial game, but I think it's so important. He's so
happy. I think he's like a moment where he's finally being recognized in life, you know, and he's enjoying it, and people are asking him, you know, dealers and curators go by and critics, and he's so happy, and his family, you know,
he's so freely deal with kids and with, you know, it's really a moment of you know, he was a young person for his entire life. Yeah, he was. I remember Glenn Lowry when we were in the process of discussing the exhibition at MoMA, and you know, that very perfectly well. It goes through all these levels of approvals and lobbying, and you have to lobby the trustees, and one day saying bluntly, I've heard Glenn talking to some of these very important trustees, collectors, you know, from the absolute uber capitalist world that Leon hated, but telling them, you know, our all masters today alive, Ellsworth Kelly, Jasper Johns, Léon Ferrari, the youngest of all, the most relevant of all to me is Léon Ferrari.
Wow.
And that day I knew, okay, we are going to go with this exhibition, and that's going to happen.
Yeah. No, that is a huge victory of yours, Luis, I have to tell you.
Anyway, maybe we have some questions. Rafa is in the background. I haven't been very attentive to the live comments, but maybe if there is a question from the audience. Who not yet? Okay, well, that's fine. So
I see many hearts, and so I'm going to send my love to all those hearts. Anna Ferrari.
Yeah, they are all there.
Florencia Ferrari, and Daniel and Nara.
Yeah. That's great. So yeah, so this is tell us about, because then there is the legacy, and how the legacy should continue to impact the world, and how the interpretation should continue to be renewing. And so you are the director of the Moderno Museum Buenos Aires. I know that you were able to get an important gift from the family. You organized a beautiful exhibition that I was able to see in Buenos Aires, and there are some of these pictures of that exhibition. So tell us about the Donación Ferrari, the Ferrari gift, and then the way the gift lives in the museum, the way the gifts relates to the collection of the museum, and to what is happening today in Buenos Aires.
Well, the donation, the gift is a very important gift from the family. 72 drawings that span the lifetime of León, from the 1960s to until the end of his life. And what I will always, I think the whole of Argentine society, being this a public museum, will be forever grateful. And in my view, it's very calming to know that art historians and curators and researchers from all over the world will be able to access this gift and this collection forever. Yeah. And be able to study it again and again. And in these 72 drawings, I dare say that at least the most important lines of research of León are included. So, of course, León was created around 5,000 drawings, and these are 72. We don't pretend to have a total representation, but yes, the main lines of work and research of León are present in those 72 works. And this is something crucial for the art history of Argentina, I think. So this is super, super important. We are in the process of creating a book that is a very long-lived process, but León is always challenging us in many ways, but this will happen.
Victoria, it's a book. It's a book on the
Of the donation. I have to say first, I thought, sometimes I'm too optimistic. And I think, I'm very utopic. So I thought, we're going to do the catalogue raisonné of Ferrari's drawings, and it proved to be a very difficult endeavor, at least for us at this time. And so we're going to publish a book of the donation finally. And at one intermediate point, I was tempted, and I said, perhaps we can show this drawing from the donation and these others that are related to that drawing. And then it became another impossible. There were like 1,000 drawings pinned in my wall. I was like, okay, no, you need to be rational. We need to be practical. So we are in that process. And what I can say is that I admire very much a family that is committed in a very generous way to the memory of Léon Ferrari. This is something that is not very usual, and I think it is an example for many other artists' families to hopefully follow. And in regards to Léon's, what Léon's body of work, the significance of that work is so enormous, and I feel that what we are doing, what you did, Luis, with your very important show at MoMA, what we did with this donation and the exhibition and the book, are just certain gestures of giving visibility to a work that really needs to be studied in a much, from many different points of view. There are so many disciplines that could approach Léon's work, from gender studies, from theological studies, from sociology, from anthropology, through today, through what is going on in the world, of course, history, but the history of religions and the story of discrimination, but not the current story of discrimination, but if we think of the last 500 years of history, Léon is speaking constantly about what happened through the colonization process. He would be speaking so loudly about what is happening today in the world, in reference to the Black defense and movement. So I think it's a body of work that one needs to go back to all the time. And it would be fantastic if many, 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 many curators and young researchers and the new generations, could approach Léon's work and revisit it. It is a work that is infinite in his statements, and it is very, very important. And he was also a figure who inspired so many artists, at least in Argentina. He is a very important
was
reference.
So generous, no?
So, he was always trying to bring art, opening his studio, opening to musicians, to young musicians, to young performers, to young visual artists. Always allow. He liked to bring people together, and he enjoyed so much the gatherings of young people, the gatherings of his family. So I think there is a lot. I think we and many other art historians like Andrea Junta, of course, and many others have worked thoroughly through his work, but
Andrea
people.
Andrea did Watershed exhibition in 2004, which is a moment, is an incredibly important moment that also brought back his fight against Bergoglio with the exhibition being closed. But definitely, it's there is an incredible legacy. And then I think this is a hopeful word to end our conversation. Like listening to Victoria, who is in charge of this incredible, beautiful museum, which is, as she has stressed, a public museum, which owns this important gift of Ferrari's work. So it guarantees for the future the presence of Ferrari in the public collections in Argentina, and the aware that is a work that infinite, it's limitless in the possibilities of interpretation that it demands from us, and it is incredibly relevant today. This was very inspiring, Victoria, to listen to you.
Likewise. I learned a lot, Luis.
Thank you on behalf of the Roeslers, Nara, Alexander, Daniel, Marina, all of them, on behalf of the gallery, and personally, fondly. Thank you very much for finding a moment in your busy days, these weeks, to do this, and thank you very much.
Thank you for thinking of me and for the invitation. I feel very honored. Thank you, and I send my love to the gallery and to all the family that I see around. Pablo also.
Yes.
Thank you, Luis.
Thank you. Bye, my dear.
And Rafaela, gracias.
Gracias, Rafaela, por tu background maravilloso. Chao, chao.